child. We perceive gifted as an advantage.
But in my
But in my
experience
working with a lot of gifted children, it's not always an advantage. And in fact, oftentimes it can be a burden.
Why would it be?
And so I've seen this a lot in our community. I've worked with a lot of people who kind of fall into this category. I suppose I sort of fall into it as well.
Where I grew up
kind of gifted, right? So like school was easy for me. I was told from a very young age that I was smart. I was also kind of held accountable for like not studying, right? They were like, I was kind of like not studying very much and maybe get a B plus or an A minus.
And my teachers
would tell my parents the same thing. Every single parent-teacher conference. They'd always say, well, if Olive just applied himself, he would be the best student in the class. If he only just studied more, he'd be the best student in the class, right? They're like, he's super smart, he has a lot of potential, right? So they use these words like they talk about how smart I am, they talk about all the potential I have, and if I just applied myself, I'd be the best student. So it's kind of interesting because we perceive giftedness as an advantage.
But as one of my teachers once told me,
we'll kind of get to this towards the end. They once explained to me that this is not in medicine, but I become a psychiatrist, I had a supervisor who once told me that gifted children are special needs children. And what that literally means is that like the needs of a child who's gifted are actually different from the average child. And the parents who recognize that and recognize that this child is going to need like a slightly different structure, or a different curriculum, or a different way of being raised, are the ones that end up sort of doing a really good job. And oddly enough, in her clinical experience, she found that much like any other special needs children, kids that were not treated appropriately despite their gifts were the ones that kind of struggled.
So this statement,
when I first heard it, I thought was like absolutely ridiculous, kind of blew my mind a little bit, but I respected the supervisor a lot and I started thinking about it.
So I'd like to share
with you today sort of the pathway that a gifted child takes, how society treats them, how parents treat them, the kind of struggles they face, or they have a struggle, call it struggles, because it may not be struggles, and then sort of how they end up. So I'd like to kind of share that with y'all today, okay?
So the first thing that tends to happen
is when a child is gifted, school tends to be easy, right? So we kind of think about it developmentally. There are a lot of different things that happen in school. So let's talk about school. So school is a place where you socialize, right? So you get socialization skills. It's a place that you learn, and people think that school is primarily about learning, and it is primarily about learning, but it's just not about learning the subject material. So sure, we learn like arithmetic, mathematics, and all that kind of stuff. We learn history and science.
All they do is shit out here.
Look at it developmentally is a wonderful opportunity to learn certain key things. Socialization is a really important piece. The other thing is like habits and how to study. And this is the first sort of disadvantage.
But then they drop you, and it fucks you up.
Is that if you're young and you're gifted, school is so easy that you sort of get by without the luxury of studying. And so we kind of perceive this as an advantage, right? Like if you go through school and you don't study, like that's easy, like it's easy clap, right?
And so it is.
And that sort of makes sense. But the interesting thing that I found is that oftentimes being intelligent, especially when you're super young as a kid, actually sets you up for failure down the road, because you never need to learn the habituated study like technique that you kind of need to, that you need to succeed later on. So for a normal kid, what tends to happen is like they don't have to study like in first grade, but maybe like second grade, third grade, you have to learn how to study like once a week maybe. They like learn how to study the night before the test because it doesn't come easily to them. And then fourth grade, fifth grade, now you're doing homework a couple days a week. You're studying 2 or 3 days before the test. Then you kind of hit middle school, where maybe you're studying like 4 days before the test. And so there's this very graduated sense of increasing responsibility as you go further and further in school.
It's sort of designed
that way, right? No teacher has a six-year-old that they're like giving 14 hours of homework a week to. It's just absurd. And then at the top end of the spectrum in terms of study habits and what we demand of students, you have something like, let's say, law school or medical school or things like that, where people are regular studying like 60 hours a week, 80 hours a week in medical school, because people have grown up and have built enough of a study habit where they can actually handle that pace of study. So what happens with the gifted kid? So the gifted kid, when you sort of level up your skill to level 1 in the first grade, and then you level up your studying skill to level 2 in the second grade, and level 3 in the third grade. So the gifted kid never actually has to like grind that XP for levels like 1 through 5 of studying habits. And so they sort of manage to get B's or A's without really minimal studying or no studying at all. And then seventh grade rolls around, 8th grade rolls around, they start to struggle a little bit maybe to get B's. They're still not learning how to study because they sort of skipped that part of the skill build. And we'll kind of get to that later. And then what tends to happen with gifted kids is that they don't need to study, and then they hit a wall. They finally get into some kind of situation where their raw intellect
is no longer
sufficient to handle the schoolwork that they're supposed to handle.
But they've
trained themselves at that point. They've customized themselves at that point to managing school with raw intellect.
And so when that
kind of falls short, they really hit a wall. It's a very hard cliff to overcome.
And so this is kind
of the first thing that sort of shoots kids in the foot. And this also leads to kind of this idea of perfectionism and burnout, because then they struggle a lot. They don't understand why they can't do it. They try. They know they're smart. Everyone's talking to them about potential. They're talking to them about themselves. So the first kind of interesting thing that gifted kids run into is the fact that they sort of don't develop the proper study habits, because as a 6-year-old, it's kind of not your fault, because you're not mature enough as a 6-year-old to realize I need to have good study habits.
But you also don't
understand.
You don't understand that
I'm going to sit down and practice my
I have the raw intellect to realize that your chain hookup literally drops me right at the end.
The second thing
to consider is the expectation. So another thing
the
that really
expectation, there
leads
is
kids
no
down the wrong
guarantee,
path
there's no
is
guarantee,
the burden of expectation that's placed upon them. So from a very young age, they're told, "Oh, you're gifted, you're smart, you're special." You have so
I
much
don't get an
potential.
expectation.
And so what that starts
You have an
to
expectation.
like a very
I don't know what to expect
in their mind.
So I'm going to use
kind of an analogy, which is kind of like,
throw you on the
if I
ground.
think about an amazing
right?
home, like I think about a mansion, it can have a beautiful blueprint,
and I can buy a gigantic piece of land,
piece of land.
I can look at that
and
and I can say like, oh, like this home or this blueprint has so much potential. And sometimes we kind of forget that like you can have a blueprint for a mansion, but that's going to actually take way more work to achieve than building a shack. So the other really interesting thing that we sort of kind of get wrong societally is that we assume that when someone is gifted, things are actually that they need to work less to accomplish the same amount. But in my experience, living up to a gifted child's potential involves more work. It's sort of like, it's just like building a shack versus building a mansion. Like, sure, the mansion is capable of so much more than the shack is capable of. But let's not forget for a moment that the amount of effort that it goes into building a mansion is actually way more than what's required to build a shack. This is the second place that gifted kids kind of get tripped up, because everyone around it is looking at them and saying, oh, like, this is an amazing mansion, like, you could build such an amazing mansion. And we all kind of forget for a moment that, like, actually living up to that potential is very difficult. It requires a lot more of an investment than building a shack. And so this gap between what people expect of you and also the idea that things should be easier for you kind of compound on themselves and sort of end up with gifted kids kind of feeling like they're failing at everything, right? Because they have all this potential and they're just not living up to it. So the other thing that we'll see in gifted kids is that what tends to happen is that they will put in some amount of work, but they're expecting a mansion when all they've really put in is as much as building a shack. I may have lost y'all a little bit there, but let me just explain. So, what a gifted kid will do is they'll look at their peers, right? They'll say like, oh, like this person did this and they're able to accomplish this, so like I should be able to do that too. And so if you look at your neighbors who are building a shack and they're like, oh, they went to Home Depot and they got like 100 pounds of wood and they built their shack over a weekend. And then like you go and get your 100 pounds of wood from Home Depot and you start like brought to you by Home Depot, I suppose. And you start building your mansion. Like, I know it sounds kind of weird, but 100 pounds of wood may be enough to build a shack, but it's nowhere near enough to build a mansion. And then what gifted kids will do is they'll look at like the foundation that they laid with 100 pounds of wood, and they'll be like, where's I don't even have a shack. You know, it's like they look at what they've accomplished when they put in the same amount of energy as someone else, and they get really confused because this person has a complete shack over here, and like I have like barely the beginnings of a mansion. And so then that sort of negatively impacts them. They start to like feel like they're actually inferior to these other people because they've been told, oh, you're smarter than the kid next door. Like, why the hell is the kid next door getting into college and like you're not even getting into college? And so it all sort of compounds, right? Because even for the gifted kid, they're not trying to build a shack because they've been told they're gifted their entire life. So it's not enough to be average if you're gifted. So what you have to do is you try to build a mansion because that's what you've been told that you're capable of. That's the expectation you set for yourself. And then you're left kind of scratching your head and wondering like why you don't even have a shack yet. Even though you studied for a month and they studied for a month, you're not getting as much as they're getting. And it's kind of super bizarre, right? We just don't think about it that way. We think that if you're gifted, that means that everything should be easier for you. Not only they may need 100 pounds of wood to build a shack, but you should be able to build a shack.
Dude, you're wasting my time. This is some bad one.
But it turns out paradoxically,
dude, shut your mouth.
And then we sort of end up with kind of the final state of which if we kind of think about it internally, is a state of like shame and low self-esteem. So all this stuff kind of comes down.
Dude, dicks don't go in ears, okay? Quit your fucking.
Like way up here. And then like, first grade goes by and
dicks don't go in your brain. They don't go in your heart, okay? You don't understand what gender is.
10th grade, 11th grade, and then you kind of tank, right? And as you go to
No
college,
gender in the
suddenly
ears,
you'll have
no
study
gender
skills involved.
in the
Now,
fucking
in the gap in
eyes or
between
in the
what you're
brain,
capable of
right?
and what you actually accomplish, this gap is where shame
No
goes.
gender
This is
in
the
the
shame
heart.
that gifted kids inevitably fall into. Which is when they
Jeez,
fall
man.
short of what their expectations
Doesn't add
are.
up.
This could be once again due to the fact that you're setting out to build a mansion, and you ended up not even building a shack, right? So all of these discrepancies between your expectations and your accomplishments, in that gap, and the bigger the gap is, the more it's filled with shame. So then what happens is kids are ashamed, right? Because they should be doing more. They should be doing better. And then the shame then further compounds and makes it hard to find motivation. And this is where you kind of get burnout. So then you have these gifted kids and you're like, hey man, just go to community college. You don't have to go to an Ivy League school. You don't have to go to Harvard, Stanford, MIT. Just go to your local community
It's owned by a
college.
bunch of fucking
And in that
retards.
comes a bunch of shame
all
because you've been told
retards.
your entire life that you're better than that, right? And so you start to
I'm
develop
better
this
than those
ego
fucking
of
retards,
being
I
a super
am.
smart kid. And then this leads to avoidance of things because all you're left with is the identity of a smart kid. So you can never even bring yourself to go to community college because smart kids don't go to community college. In your mind, that's where the stupid kids go. And if you go to community college, then suddenly you've lived your entire life for 20 years being told you're a smart kid. It's the only that's your biggest strength. It's the one that everyone keeps talking about. And now suddenly you have to relegate yourself to being a stupid kid. And in that gap is where the shame lives. In that gap is where the anger lives.
I go to Oxford. That's
So it's really, really hard, right? Because you're set up with these expectations. People don't really acknowledge that because you're capable of a lot, it's actually going to take a lot of work to take that potential and bring it to fruition, right? And that's that's the biggest thing is people just lose sight of the fact that building a mansion actually takes more work than building a shack. And your entire life, people have told you you should build this mansion because that's what you're capable of. And so then we kind of get to, all right, so what do we do about it, right? So if you're a gifted kid who's kind of perfectionistic and burnt out, and society sort of set you up this way, I'm not saying that you're not individually responsible as well, but I do think that there's a whole reason. So when we have a generation of burnt out gifted kids, I think we have to be fair and be a little bit scientific and kind of acknowledge that this may not be an individual problem, right? When we've got a generation of kids like this, maybe there's something societal going on. And I think paradoxically, we sort of set these kids up to struggle. And so then the question becomes, okay, what do we do about it? So the first thing you should do if you're a gifted kid is to stop comparison, right? Like comparison is the foundation of getting out of struggle. Because as long as you are comparing yourself, and this is part of the issue, is that if you think about the word gifted, what does the word gifted imply? It is a word that has no meaning outside of a comparative framework. You guys get that? The only way you can be gifted is if there are other people who are not gifted.
What were you given?
And so essentially what happens is the whole idea of a gifted kid only exists in relationship to another kid. And so what we find in the minds of gifted kids is that they're comparing themselves all the time. Oh, I don't want to go to community college. That's where
the gifted kid is under
I don't know what I
attack.
can't do what my friend is capable of. Like he's able to do so much.
The
Why
gifted
am I
kid
not
is
able to?
labeled
I have an older sibling who did fantastic. And now I have
it's a second party label.
There's so much all of the expectations that gifted kids have don't come from themselves. Right? Because if you actually base your expectations on what you're capable of, you'd be capable of a B, C, D, or an F. That would be a realistic expectation. But instead, you create these artificial expectations that are based on comparison. And why do gifted kids do that? Because it starts with their parents. It starts with their teachers. We're all told that we're gifted, which is by definition.
Yeah, I don't say other people are gifted.
And so then what happens is you're looking over at the shack, and you've got this blueprint for a mansion, and they give you some wood, and then you try to build the mansion, and you don't even have a roof. When this person has a completely built shack, and then you kind of look at yourself and like, man, I must be like a super idiot, right?
I will say other people are super idiots and retarded. I will say that.
I will say ourselves a failure because it's never going to work.
I'll call it out where it is,
Base the expectations of your life and what you're capable of based on what someone else is doing. Right? If someone else is happy studying chemical engineering, it doesn't mean that you're going to be happy.
The only gift I want is the
if somebody
fucking
else is happy
ass.
dating someone of the opposite sex, it doesn't mean that
I want the dagger.
The whole point is that as individuals, as humans, we're individuals. And if you're gifted, the first thing you've got to do is let go of all comparison. So next thing is to recognize that your road is going to be a rough one, right? So like when someone sets out to build a
if someone can truly
they
give
know
me
in their
something,
mind that
it should be my
this is going to
death.
take a while, right? You can't expect to build a mansion in the same amount of time it would take someone to build a shack. And so if you're a gifted kid and you expect a lot from yourself, okay, recognize that this is going to be a long road. And the greater your potential is, the longer it's going to take for you to get there. And this is something that I can understand in hindsight. Like so I grew up as a gifted kid and was like in the special classes or whatever. I actually still remember when I was in 8th grade, my grades started to get better when I went to high school. I didn't qualify for, based on my grades, like my high school was like, yeah, he needs to be in like regular English. He can't be in like advanced English. He doesn't meet the criteria for advanced English. And so my parents were really not happy with that because they have such a smart boy. He's so smart. He just needs to apply himself. So they went to the school, and I remember having a meeting with the honors English teacher or whatever. And then he's like, do you want to be in this class? And I was like, yeah, I want to be in the class. And my parents were like, yeah, he belongs. He belongs in the class. Right? And so the teacher was like, okay, fine. I mean, you're not going to argue. There's some parents that could potentially be annoying, so you're like, whatever. And so I ended up being in the class that I really didn't belong in. I just really didn't do very well. Right? Because I didn't have the work ethic. But it propagates sort of this idea of like, you can handle it. So like, I started off, going on the wrong track. Kind of like in high school, it took me 5 years to graduate from college, right, with a 2.5 GPA. Took me another 3 or 4 years to even get into medical school. And so like my road has been long. And like that's just sometimes what it takes if you're a gifted kid, right? You take the scenic route in life. So oftentimes people would ask me, about stuff. When I remember when I started medical school and I saw friends of mine, right, who I was in high school with, they're already fully trained doctors and flying around and all that stuff. And I was like, yeah, I took the scenic route. And so recognize that even if you're gifted, it's a long road. You're not going to do things faster. You're not going to build a nation as fast as someone else is going to build a shack. The other thing to recognize about it being a long road, if you're a gifted kid, is don't expect to see the form of your mansion for a long time. When other people have built their shacks, you will still just have the foundation of the mansion. It's not going to have a roof for a long time.
There's perceptional, observational logic on one side. Then there's information and number crunching, basically. So there's data and number crunching and gathering.
And makes them want to give up.
So all you can do is really gather. All you do is pull it in. Okay, and then there's the like creative, artistic aspect, like carpenter, builder. So there's
gifted kids oftentimes
there.
Okay. Shame, and that
the issue is they've completely dropped observation, perception, and logic.
Where your shame is going to live. And so as long as there's a gap in what you expect from yourself,
it's not even there. It doesn't exist.
You will have shame. And the solution to that, oddly enough, is
so look at this graph. It shouldn't have 2 lines. It should have 3 lines.
Expectations that you have, right? So you can actually shoot up here and land.
So you can get a real fucking comparison, because this is just retarded. That's retardism.
Do a tech startup or whatever.
That's literal idol.
Do everything that everyone's always known you're capable of doing. So you can actually hit
this whole thing is retarded.
That's one option. Then the shame will go away. Or what you can do is
like the topic itself should never be discussed.
Bring yourself down. Because shame exists in the gap. So even if you accept yourself as being like sort of a failure, oddly enough, the shame will go away. And as you accept yourself as you are, which is not wasted potential, but like in the present, like you are everything that you're capable of. Everything that you've ever been capable of is exactly what you've achieved. And once you sort of take that attitude, bring your expectations down to here, you will be amazed at like what happens to your motivation and what you are truly capable of. But you can't achieve it as long as there's that shame gap, right? Like in terms of performance. So, questions.
What do you mean performance?
Anyway, so I think that like we see this a lot where a lot of people are gifted, and we think of that as an advantage. But like I was saying earlier, I think that sometimes being gifted comes with its own set of needs, and by properly addressing those needs, we can avoid some of these things like gifted kids, feeling ashamed of themselves, gifted kids, not comparing themselves to like all the other normal kids and finding themselves lacking.
I don't know what you're talking about.
We have to kind of acknowledge that our school system is set up in a way that oftentimes causes kids to stumble.
And usually what I produce is a gift anyway.
Child who is gifted,
so it's literally
an adult who's perfectionistic and burnt out.
To look at, that's the point of having a son.
In order to sort of
religion, that's the point of having a son in Christianity. Anytime you produce something, anything that's physical, that's a son, okay? And to even get in the way, or block it, or get in the way, or attack it in any way, is like murder, it's something murder.
Such a critical deciding factor.
It's about reproduction. Since we're creators,
I did some amount of graduate education, so I did a master's degree.
Sons of the creator.
The second thing
it's
that
all
I
about
did
just
go to Harvard for medical
reproduction.
school. I went
Okay,
to
love is a
byproduct.
byproduct.
And then I did my psychiatry training at Harvard.
Procreation.
And so the short answer of like how I found out there is like one step at a time.
First,
so you have to do, and each of those things involve like a reality check.
Byproduct is love.
In terms of like thinking like I actually don't belong at Harvard. Like I'm never going to wind up there. I had to accept that. Let alone get into medical school. And the more that I accepted it,
you're not going to procreate with me by ear fucking.
humbling.
Okay, I don't like getting ear
I wouldn't
fucked.
quite say undignified.
Like,
but
all I
really
do is
let
get
go of
ear
my ego
fucked,
and
like, it's
take
insane.
one step at a time. It also took perseverance. I mean, I applied
I did, I got it. I'll show you the pros. I got,
and then like understanding.
I got like metal gel bars in my ears
worked hard
because I guess that's what people like to do. That's why we listen to metal. Because all we do is have people screaming and basically ear
So I basically
fucking
did
and
an
dropping
audition
us.
rotation at Harvard, which is like super competitive. You show up there with a bunch of other people who want to go there. And it's basically like a test. It's like a month-long test of what you're capable of. And I did
Ear
really
cummies.
well. So thankfully I had set up a lot of good stuff over the last 8 years in terms of being myself and like owning the person that I was and not being ashamed of the fact that I failed. And recognizing that most of the students, most of the other students who were auditioning were 4 years younger than I was, that I was actually older than some of the residents there, despite the fact that they were evaluating me, right? So like, there's someone 2 years younger who's like giving me a grade. So navigating all that stuff was difficult, but I did a good job at it and stayed focused, and that's how I wound up. So I trained there for 4 years, and that's where I'm back.
Then it depends if they're good at what they do. That's whatever. I don't give a shit
But it's
how
all
old
about
they
like
are.
letting go of the ego.
I didn't like. I mean, like a 12-year-old kid's gonna be better than me at skateboarding. Like it doesn't matter.
How do you lower expectations? You lower expectations by accepting what you're capable of. Like actually accepting. So expectation and acceptance are at opposite ends of the spectrum. Okay, so practicing acceptance is how you lower expectations. So let me give you guys an example. So the theme today is jnana yoga, right? So let me think about a jnana yoga exercise to let go of expectations. Let me just think about this for a second.
It just depends what you're doing. What are you doing? Like if you get fired, like it's
so here's
random.
a good example of a jnana yoga exercise. Actually, I don't know if this is a good example. This is one of the ones that I feel less confident. This may be a bad example of a jnana yoga exercise. So for the next month or 2 months, when you go to a restaurant and someone asks you what you want to order, just tell the waiter to surprise you. Just tell them surprise me. And then pay attention to your enjoyment or lack of enjoyment of the food. Right, so when we go to restaurants, we have expectations. And if we think about the worst experience that you can have at a restaurant is not actually to have bad food. It's to expect really good food and get bad food. That's actually worse than getting bad food. If you know a restaurant is crap and you go there, you order something what you get is crap. Like what were you expecting? It's totally fine, actually. Right, we do that every day. Like when you go to a fast food, like McDonald's or Taco Bell or whatever. Like you're not expecting, like a gourmet meal. You're just expecting some like mediocre or arguably incredibly tasty.
First off, I don't expect gourmet meals in general.
But you can't get any. Because they're out of sad. But so like a lot
That's
of
a terrible
understand.
one,
So this is the way that Jnana
That was
Yoga. If you really
terrible.
want to understand expectations and acceptance, you have to
No,
put
dude.
yourself in situations that are like.
Dude, that was the worst example ever,
And you can't
dude.
put yourself in
So
situations
imagine you're a
where
farmer,
expectations that come
right?
from the
You're a
situation.
farmer, and you have like all these acres, and you have to make sure that you get the right yield from your farm. Right?
You can ask
when
if
a
they don't know
drought
what
comes,
to
okay?
Okay,
That is
You've
expectations.
got dietary restrictions.
Okay.
Dietary restrictions. And then you're like, but what if I don't like the food that I get? Well, yeah, I mean that's the point, right? So like, just eat what you get and see what happens. And you're like, but I don't like it. And it's like, yes. So like, pay attention to that. Be like, how hard is it for you to order food that you're not going to like? Order without expectations. What's it like to go to a restaurant and accept that you're going to just get some random pile of food that could be amazing and could be something that you really dislike? That's how you gain acceptance. That's how you let go of expectations. By literally going to a restaurant and like actively letting them go. That is the
how the weather works.
And then you may discover all kinds of cool things, right? You may even discover, for example, that if you go to the restaurant and you expect crap, if you're like, this is going to be an absolute train wreck, I'm going to have to go home and like have a bowl of cereal after the meal. It'll be really interesting how much you enjoy your meal. It'll be really interesting because in that moment, what you're doing is letting go of the expectation, right? And then like suddenly, even if you get crap, it's not a big deal. And if you get something delicious, it's like such a huge win. And that's what it means to let go of expectation. The more you let go of expectation, the more you start to enjoy life and the better life gets. It's kind of bizarre. So literally, if you guys want a Jnana Yoga practice to let go of expectations and earn acceptance, you can't just do this once, right? So you can't like wuss out of it. You have to do it for a month. Presuming you're going to go out to eat, and you can afford that and all that good stuff. Otherwise, like, make it 3 months.
That's such a terrible example,
Do it for a while. Like, commit yourself. This is my life now. GG. Get wrecked, noobs.
I don't expect anything. Ever. It's bad. It's bad.
Try it. You guys want to learn Jnana Yoga? Try it. Okay, so someone else is asking how should a parent
There's
manage or support
you can
sexual
attempt,
needs
right?
of gifted people? If what's
It's just, I
happening
know
now
I'm
is
gonna do
happening.
my best, no matter
I'll give you an
what, because
example.
I only do my best. I won't even
sometimes I get
move
parents
unless
like
it's my best. Alright? I
And
don't
the
have
kid is
fucking
addicted to video
hands.
games. Why is a kid
I
addicted
don't
to video
have, I
games?
don't have
Really
hands
simple.
to do that, right?
Because video games
That's what
match the
happens.
pace of the child.
That's
Right?
what happens. You
That's
don't
why
get
gifted kids, in a
fucking
nutshell, the reason that gifted
antsy
kids get
hands
addicted to
that
video
like
games
just
is
want to
one
like
very,
fuck
very, very
everything.
simple
You want to get
reason.
your
It can all be
cummies
reduced to
going, like it's
games
weird.
match the pace of the child and school doesn't.
You just
So
like
you've got
want
a
to get
kid
your
goes
cummies,
to
like
school,
it's so
gets a
fucking
worksheet,
weird.
does
It's
a
really
worksheet.
sick,
I still
dude.
remember. I had this
It's fucking
experience
mental
in the
disease.
first grade. So this is what happened. I went to a school where, you know, I do a worksheet, and then like they give me another one. And so in my first day of first grade, I moved schools. I gave, you know, I got a worksheet, I did the worksheet, I gave it back to her, and I said, can I have the next one? And she's like, what do you mean the next one? It's like the next one, like whatever's next, like I'm done with this. We've got class for another 45 minutes, I'm done with this. Can I have the next one? She's like, there is no next one. I'm like, what? And then it didn't take long where like, you know, she gave me, and then she evaluated me, and I got moved up, the same problem there. And then eventually, like what happens, like school moves at the pace of like the slowest person. Now here's the really addictive thing about a video game. Now imagine you're just bored at school because it's moving at a snail's pace, right? Because there's like other 6-year-olds and like you're a 6-year-old too, and maybe you're smarter than the other 6-year-olds. Now enter a video game. What happens when you don't beat level 1? You replay level 1. And what happens when you beat level 1? You go straight to level 2. And if you beat level 2, you go straight to level 3. You beat level 3, you go straight to level 4. So games perfectly match the challenge that a human being is capable of. Right? If you get stuck on Dark Souls, like you don't get to move past the boss.
It's always expert
Because your parents make a phone call
whatever the hardest
from
difficulty
software,
is.
they're like, hey, my son's really
Don't
good at
be a
video games.
pussy.
Can you please advance him past this boss and stick him to the next boss?
It's 100%
Like, you can't do that in Dark
or
Souls. Like, Dark Souls doesn't give a shit, right?
100% or nothing.
Kids get addicted to video games because they
Like,
perfectly
are
match
you kidding me?
what you're capable of, which is exactly what kids like. There's this whole thing called intent to mastery. You teach all this stuff to parents and things like that.
Dude, 100%
So what do you do if you've got a kid who's gifted? You
I go in there
and you
with
don't
intent to
rely
win
on
and to
school to
fucking
do it.
slay it.
So when parents come to me and they're
I
like, I
go
have a
in
kid
there
who's
with
addicted to video
intent
games,
to
he's
slay
16.
it.
I think school is, I ask him, okay, what do you think about school? He's like, school's boring. And then what I do is I make a couple of phone calls and I'm like, we're gonna, like, so this was back when I was in Boston, a lot of cool startups in Boston. So what we'll do is we'll make some phone calls, we'll stick them in an internship somewhere. Like we'll take some college level internship at some kind of startup. So like we'll look around at like incubators from like MIT or whatever, like Harvard. We'll be like, hey, like there's a kid. Do you guys have any internship opportunities available? And we'll stick him there. And he'll work there for the summer. And it like turns the kid right around. No more video games. Because he's actually like learning. So I stuck one kid in this startup that there's an app. You take a picture of a mole on your body and it tells you the percentage chance that the mole is cancerous. Right? So we stick the kid there. And we're like, go help them. And then like sometimes the kid is like, what am I supposed to do? Like you start by getting him coffee. And then maybe you'll learn something. And then it's actually fantastic. Like they do really well. You challenge them, right? And because the cool thing is that a lot of the startup folks, they sort of recognize, because some of them are like misfits too. So they're like, okay, there's like a kid here, like let's put him to work, because they recognize like, okay, you're 16, so you know how to like manage SQL databases, and the kid is like, no. They're like, Google it and learn.
Oh, wait,
and then
so
you're gonna
they
manage our SQL database
misfit?
next week. And the kid is like,
They
what?
misfit,
Yeah.
like
And some
they
like the kid is like goes home, he's not playing video
They
games, like
fit in weirdly,
reading about
or-
SQL databases or whatever.
They're just like,
Just stick them into it and challenge them. So as a parent, you know, or a teacher, like I'd say, like ask them. So here's the biggest mistake that parents and teachers make with gifted children.
usually means they don't fit.
Is that
so like, so
when
there's
a
land,
gifted child
right?
fails, what we
But
tend to do is slow down.
You took all the
Instead of
lands
what
from
you do,
them.
it's absolutely terrifying. So if
You
a
literally
gifted child is failing, what they need more than anything else is a bigger challenge, not like an easier environment. Now you have to make sure for a couple of other things, like you need to make sure there's not ADHD going on,
I'm a
depression
servant.
going on, learning
A
disabilities
servant.
or other things like that going
That's all I
on.
can do.
But in the absence of all those things, challenge them more, not less. Ask them to do more. Put them in positions of leadership, right? And just push them. Because like it's so fulfilling when you take a kid in that situation, and you're like, you're gonna need to do this thing. And they're like, I can't do that thing. And you're like, okay, so then fail. But try. If you fail, like no big deal. But I'm not gonna expect less of you. I know it's kind of paradoxical. We just talked about expectation. But it's not really expectation. It's really having faith in that. Subtle difference.
That's the
Like I
point.
have faith in you. You can handle it. So like give it your best shot. That's what you do. You challenge them. Respect them.
That's what happens when you ask for responsibilities when you're a kid and you get denied all of them. I mean, that happens. You know, is that. You know, just constantly dropped, right? Your borders are up against mine.
Let it rain, let the storm rage, let the water run high. Let it rain, oh, won't you let it rain. Upsides to the river of fire.
I don't know, it's a fucking Nazi movie. I think it was bastards. And you're literally the inspector guy. You're the inspector guy.
so
Like, I
much.
had a
Got
show.
rid Let it rain, oh, won't you let it rain? Let the storm rage, let the water run high. Let it rain, oh, won't you let it rain? Baptized in a river of fire. Let the storm rage, let the water run high. Baptize me in a river of fire.
You can clearly tell like there's dragons and cyclops and vampires and ghosts and all the shit going on. Like werewolves, right? Just RPGs. They're fucking everywhere. And I was getting some different shit. It's like, it's just around everything. Thanksgiving, man. It's Thanksgiving. That hates taking. All it is hate taking and war out here. It's run by a bunch of fucking retards. Everyone's a bunch of fucking
Let it rain, oh, won't you let it rain? Let the storm rage, let the water run high. Let it rain, oh, won't you let it rain? Baptized in a river of fire. Let the storm rage, let the water run high. Baptize me in a river of fire. Let the storm rage, let the water run high. Baptize me in a river of fire. Let the storm rage, let the waters run. Baptize me in a river of fire. Baptize me in a river of
So when they're in the box, they move the box up against your walls, and now they've built up against your walls. And like, dude, like, no, you can't do that. You just can't do that, man. I mean, that's why gender is male and female, man. Like, female voice in the film, man. Female voice in the film. Female voice. Right? Whatever is gonna be female outside of it. And then, dude, just the fucking liquid itself is, it's 1/3 female, 2/3 male, okay? And then if it's like, it's 2/3 female, 1/3 male, okay? So it also things it's male aspect and being a third is female aspect. I'm not even
Get a little bit higher, so we can fall till we bleed. Push a little bit harder, pull me into the speed. So tell me,
anyways, they're all so stupid.
come into my dreams. Are you ready to awaken? Are you ready to be?